I'm going to come to you. This is not going to be a very long conversation. Good evening to all of you. Prathikrit, you've just heard the former health minister of Canada, who was from Mr. Trudeau's party. I want to ask you, I mean, the gloves have been off for a while between India and Canada. But have we reached a point of no return where Canada publicly is accepting that they named India's topmost minister for the killing of a known Khalistani, which is Niger, and then leaked that name to Washington Post? Is this the point of no return?
Shreya, first of all, my best wishes of Diwali to you and the rest of the panelists. Number one, I was hearing that interview, and I must say this without making any personal comment, that if somebody doesn't know the subject, that person should not make up stories. During the foreign interference inquiry, that happened on Trudeau, Trudeau was on record stating that they were weak on intelligence, and there was no evidentiary proof that they could share with the government of India. He mentioned it, and I quote, he said, they asked to show the evidence, and at that point, it was primarily intelligence and not hard evidentiary proof that Trudeau had. Number one. Number two, he was the one who used the word called credible allegation. I mean, he was inventing new words in English language. There is never an incident of a prime minister of a country saying that I have you can share credible proof, but not credible allegation. So the entire thing was entirely, framed up first and foremost. And look at the way they are doing it. They're gradually, in a calibrated manner, upping the ante right now, sharing inputs with the Washington Post and actually naming. Please understand, Canada is actually acting far above its paycheck. It is part of an Anglo-Saxon group called G7. It is its GDP is half that of India. So please let me tell you the bigger point. The Five Eyes intelligence was very concerned about a plumber called Niger, but its entire intelligence input could not tell Israel that the October 7 attack is going to happen. So the entire thing that is happening against India, Canada is a small pawn in the larger scheme of things that is happening. So you would see what all started right after G20 summit, when India named African Union to be included, when India was successful in coming out with a communique. Trudeau's statement against India started right at that time, right inside in India. And I must say, there is a big brother who is telling Trudeau something to be done. You know, what is the difference between the American approach and the Canadian approach? It is exactly the same, that when something hits them, it is terrorism. And if something hits somebody else, it is activism. The United States has something called an extraordinary rendition program, which we know on which they can do anything to anybody outside their territorial jurisdiction who attacks the United States. And the same Trudeau government, his father, we must remember what was done during the Kanishka Air India bombing and what was the history. So let me tell you, we would face a lot of things, because they are very upset that the war between India and China, which they anticipated, is not going to happen, and that we have a strategic autonomy which we have maintained.
Okay.
And they are gradually upping the ante. We would say, I think it has reached a point where Canada, I'm sure more will be done from India, because India is making out that enough is enough.
Okay, Dr. Swasti Rao, that's true. For years, India has pleaded that there are Khalistanis who are working and attacking India from Canadian soil. Do something about it. Yet Canada has not done anything for years. You have had floats which have depicted a former prime minister of this country being assassinated. Canada has let that pass in the name of activism. I want to ask Canada if this is activism. There is a man called Pannoon, who's an American-Canadian citizen, ladies and gentlemen, who constantly was issuing threats to Air India. Do activists threaten to blow up planes? They're not called activists, they're called terrorists, right? These very terrorists blew up a plane, an Air India plane, in which 300 people were killed. It's called the Kanishka bombings. Prathikrit was just referring to it. 300 people had been killed, most of them Canadian citizens. It was done by Khalistanis, and yet you continue to support them. Dr. Rao, is this just Canadian politics playing out, or is there something more to this escalation? Because escalation it is, when you name the man you have named.
Yeah. So thank you for that question, and great to be on your show. So, well, there are a couple of things, and this is something which is very murky because while on the one hand we all know that Canada has had a history of mollycoddling with these Khalistani elements, whether it's the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. So it's not Trudeau alone. It's just that Trudeau's father was Prime Minister. Pierre Trudeau, when he was a Prime Minister, you had the Kanishka incident happening, and sadly, the Canadians themselves seem to have forgotten about it because they have not really done what was required to be done, which was about a proper inquiry and then actually giving justice to the victims. They never did that. So it's very clear that there is a kind of a clutch and a hold of the Khalistani element in Canadian politics, and I think it's a completely Canadian mystery as to why these guys, if they claim to be first world countries, are not interested in solving this problem, which is actually a very serious criminal issue within their own societies, right? Now, that's the first part. So about Justin Trudeau and Justin Trudeau's dependence on these Khalistani elements, I think it's very, very clear. We've been discussing about it no end. What really got me by surprise was how the opposition leader, because, days ago, the opposition leader had actually come up with a very public rebuttal of the way Justin Trudeau had been handling this entire situation. And if you actually went, when you scroll down the public rebuttal, it actually said that Justin Trudeau has actually been lying because he does not really come out with any hard evidence. He doesn't come out with the names of the MPs that he says could be involved in that so-called foreign interference, so on and so forth. And now we have a situation, look at this day, what has happened. We were discussing that perhaps after Justin Trudeau goes away, right now he has a crisis of legitimacy because of the kind of fool he has made of himself, standing in his parliament without hard evidence and calling out against India. There's another thing that I'd like to, I was listening to what you were speaking to with Mr. Dosanjh. I think there's one thing that the Canadians need to understand well. The thing is that nobody is denying that if there is hard evidence, the Indian side should respond and respond in a manner which is, rational. The problem is that they do not come up with hard evidence. And in an absence of a hard evidence and operating upon raw intelligence, it just looks very, very unconvincing for the head of a state, like a prime minister of a state, to actually go speak like that about a foreign, friendly country, and then basically be reduced to a kind of a joke in his own country. So I was of the opinion that perhaps because we have larger convergences, you cannot doubt, Shreya, that yes, there is the factor of a diaspora. There are 3 billion people of Indian origin out there. There is a steady trade. There are things like, for example, convergence in the larger Indo-Pacific region. The pension funds, etc., have been trying to diversify away from China. So there are a couple of convergences, out there. Now, if the opposition leader himself lands a
trade is one of them.
Diwali event, right? I mean, a Diwali event. Look at that. How childish can you get? Okay, if you land up canceling a Diwali event,
that is a childish response.
Yes.
And as Dr. Rao, what was also childish was leaking India's top minister's name to Washington Post.
No,